Welcome to Utah Stories. So today on the program, we are talking all things affordable housing, and we actually have what's been labeled an affordable housing crisis here in Utah. And I'm about to show you some clips of people I talked to on the streets who are suffering the most from that crisis. As our state's population continues to grow while housing shortage is projected to increase, it's been reported we are short 37,000 housing units this year, according to the Kem Gardner Policy Institute. More research has shown that Utah has experienced the fourth highest housing price increases in the past 5 years. So what is being done about this crisis? So with me on the program today is Steve Waldrip, who was appointed by Utah Governor Spencer Cox to be the Senior Advisor for a Housing Affordability Strategy. Thanks for joining me, Steve.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So before we dive in, I just want to tell you about Utah Stories magazine. This program is brought to you by this magazine. This will make your life better if you subscribe to it. This is all about the farmers markets, how to find fresh local produce, how to support local farmers, how to stop suburban sprawl. It's just an awesome issue. It's our farm issue we do every June. July, we have another theme that's basically our fun guide, how to staycation throughout Utah. Subscribe to the magazine, that supports this program. Like, subscribe, share, everything like that too. All right, so how do we solve the affordable housing crisis, Steve?
Well, that's just an easy question to start with. I mean, I think, let me get into Mideast peace first, and then I'll do world hunger, and then we'll get to that because those are shorter.
Let's just do those three.
No, it's an incredibly complex issue. There are so many factors that go into housing prices. When people talk about the free market in housing, it's really a misnomer. I mean, housing is the thing that we regulate most from the top levels of government all the way down to the lowest level of HOA. We touch on it at the federal level significantly with financing, the state level with building codes, local level with zoning, both county and city, and then we go down to HOAs that have even more. So we have a tremendous amount of controls around housing, and frankly, that's why we're in the situation that we're in right now. Some well-intentioned things haven't worked out so well, and some less well-intentioned things have produced results that should have been predictable some time ago with some of our zoning issues that we've created.
Seems like the intentions are always great, but they end up creating more red tape and barriers actually than they solve the problem.
Yeah, and I would even say some of the intentions that created our current issues were not the greatest. In fact, some of them were actually pretty bad. Zoning came about, initially it was to keep slaughterhouses from being next to a neighborhood, or in the middle of a neighborhood. And obviously there's great public policy around that. When you look at the history of Utah, Brigham Young mapped out Salt Lake City. You remember those early maps, you can see Brigham Young drawing the lines, and he actually followed Joseph Smith's layout of Nauvoo. Very master planned, very, thoughtfully conceptual. But then we had zoning laws that came along back in the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, 50s that were very racially biased. And so that drove a lot of what we're dealing with today, where you have single family homes are only allowed here, and they're only allowed if they're this size and the lot's this size. And that grew out of that, reaction to integration in some sense, and we created this structure where hyper-locality determined our neighborhoods. And so it went away from the initial, hey, master plan this whole area, to we're going to allow this, arbitrary. We're just saying, okay, city, you're now in charge of zoning for the area.
And you can only have 1/8 of an acre lots, and you can build one home on that lot. And that's the suburbs, which is,
and that's
gobbled up all the land.
Yeah, and you can't, we don't want to have, multifamily in those neighborhoods, because that brings an undesirable element in, and that was the genesis of a lot of that. And I think most of those, most of the bias around that is gone now, but we're dealing with the legacy of that reaction.
Yeah, and I looked into it. It was called Euclidean zoning back in the 30s, because there was a Supreme Court case where they were literally suing. A developer was suing because an affordable housing district was being built next to a wealthy neighborhood, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they decided, I believe that the decision was they could exclude the affordable housing away from the wealthy neighborhood, and like you said, it is racially biased. It just favors the wealthy over the poor. Mm-hmm. And you go to, we lived in UK for a year, and you go there and you notice there's all sorts of different socioeconomic housing in one little town, and you've got small, tiny little flats next to, that are multifamily, next to big housing units, and it's just all everything. Why can't we just get back that hodgepodge way of doing zoning?
That really is the key, and those are the healthiest communities, actually, and there's a lot of empirical data around that, where you have mixed income communities, mix of larger, single family homes with yards, and mix those in with smaller single family homes, and mixed in with some multifamily and row home, townhome projects and those kind of things. That creates a better mix for a community, because what that does is it allows somebody to come into a community, get started, and then grow within that community without having to displace their family, go somewhere else. They can stay in a community, and you can literally age in and then age back out as you get to a point where you want to, no longer take care of a yard. I want to go back to not having a yard and having a small home. You can do that within your community. So those really are truly the healthiest communities, and the healthiest place for kids to grow up, frankly, because you get exposure to a lot of different socioeconomic strata, and you also create the opportunity for social capital to be developed in a way that you can't when you have concentrations of wealth and concentrations of lower socioeconomic strata.
How do you define social capital? What is that?
Social capital is, it's probably easiest to define as when you are hanging out with a CEO, and you're a kid, and you're doing homework at his house because your friend is the CEO's son, and your mom is the maid at the business, but you're hanging out at their house. They get to know you. Next, when you say, hey, I need an internship, the CEO now knows this person, and they have some social capital in that world to draw on, that they can go and get an internship or a job interview or other opportunities that only exist because of those relationships.
Yeah.
And we lose that when we separate out our communities.
Yeah, when we stratify
Mm-hmm.
the neighborhood so much. So no offense, but why are mostly developers assigned the task of solving the affordable housing crisis?
You got to have the foxes in the hen house. That's the best way to do it, right? And it kind of goes back to that initial comment. It's really a complex issue. Financing structures are very, very tricky. It's gotten harder with interest rates rising. If you look at what we do with affordable housing and deeply affordable housing, the application process for the federal grants for low-income housing tax credits are inches and inches thick of binders, and so it's really, really difficult to sort of just jump into that space. The capital requirements high, the barriers to entry are high. It's really difficult for somebody to come in kind of off the street and say, hey, I want to start a housing company, because you got to have some serious cash to get into that game. So it's just a function of the financial aspects of it.
So I want to play for our viewers a clip, and for you.
And tell me about your challenges with affordable housing. What have you run into?
Rent's really expensive, and it's hard to get into a place unless you have a job, make a lot of money. It'd be much helpful to have a lot cheaper rent, like a lot more affordable housing, Section 8 and stuff, so people can get off the street easier.
So are you currently on the street?
Yeah,
You using the shelters or?
yeah,
sort of
I
thing?
stay at a shelter.
Yeah. And so, what would you need right now to be able to get into an apartment?
Well, I get like SSI, but like pretty much waiting list and whatnot, and funds.
You-
I know they have good programs here, like to help help a lot of people get in and stuff, and even the ones that help to till you can establish a job and stuff to help you get in. That's good. I'd say yeah, like that's what really helps a lot of people. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure, and more of that would be great.
Yeah. What were you paying when you were in a house?
I was paying like $850.
Okay, so his name's Mike, and what he was saying at the end there was he was paying $850 a month for a tiny studio apartment in Layton. He didn't say how he ended up on the streets, but I talked to him a little more, and it was drugs.
Mm.
But he's trying to get back into housing. What would you recommend Mike does to get back into housing as soon as possible?
He's in one of the most challenging areas because obviously with substance abuse issues and addiction issues makes it really difficult to have life stability. The best thing to do probably would be for him to get employment help, go to some of those. We have several opportunities for people to go in and get help getting employment, getting training, but it's a tough bureaucracy.
He says he's on a waiting list for Section 8 that's a year out.
Section 8 is, very, very difficult to get into. It's the need is far, far greater. In fact, in Salt Lake City last year, we had over 5,000 new individual homeless persons in Salt Lake City in 1 year.
Wow.
That unique individuals that had never been homeless before. And I think that highlights the issues we've seen with rents going through the roof. Rents have gone up several $100s per month over the last several years. I can't believe you found any place for $850. That's really, that's really kind of a find. Yeah. And so the problem with our housing shortage as well, if you look at the statistics, the further down the income scale you go, the greater the shortage is. And when you get to the bottom level of that scale, the shortage is incredibly acute. And the challenge is those housing units are not economically viable. They don't pencil, as our housing czar Wayne Niederhauser says. They just don't. And so they require, at that level, you have to have government subsidies in order to develop, maintain, and operate that housing. And that's really tough.
Well, I would push back on that a little bit because they don't pencil under the current models that we operate under and the current zoning laws. But why don't we make an emergency session of the state legislature to change zoning laws to have more, say, tiny home villages or pod villages, just to get everybody off the streets? It just seems like we're stuck thinking inside of the box. And I see empty lots all over. I see non-used land that could just be little shacks. Why don't we do something like that?
Those are really, really good questions. And part of it goes back to our initial discussion where we have intentionally granted hyper-local control on zoning issues and on housing to our smallest, elective bodies at the city level, and that has given rise to, in essence, some hostage taking, where a very focused and vocal group can dominate, a political structure at a city level. We've had entire city councils and mayors tossed out of office because people were upset that they did too much housing and too much density, and they were, the threat is all, the quote is always, you're ruining our way of life, you're destroying our neighborhood, you're destroying our community, we are a rural area, we want to stay that way, and it's sort of this, I want to stop progress. And my response to that is people have been trying to stop progress since the beginning of time. No one's succeeded yet, but you could be the first. You might be just the very first people that to succeed in stopping
and it's
growth.
NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and you get that everywhere across Utah, and I know that's probably your number one job is to defeat NIMBYism. But how can you tell me, how do you define affordable housing? Because there was $150 million of money through grants allocated to deeply affordable housing, which went through the Wayne Hederhauser's office. I think your office tried to get $150 million, but it was measures passed in the legislature instead of that. But what is the definition of affordable housing?
Yeah, I mean, it really, you go from what you just talked about, deeply affordable, which is typically, we talk about it in terms of AMI, area median income. And so the area median income is the average wage for any given area for a certain family size. Salt Lake, I think right now is about 87,000, if I remember right, is the area median income. And so as you go down from that, 20% and below is the deeply affordable space, where you're making 20% or below of that area median income. And that's where you really need significant help. You go up from 30 to about 50, and that's very low income. 30 to 50% of that area median income, that AMI. And that's where we have an acute shortage of housing in that space as well.
That's supposed to be the affordable area.
Well, I mean, that's very affordable. And then you go to affordability, which is like 50 to 80% of AMI. And we have a shortage there as well. That's what typically gets termed as affordable housing, is 50 to 80% of AMI. And then from 80 to 120% of AMI is what we call market rate housing. And the interesting thing that's happened, if you look back from, let's say, 2019 until today, when you take the median income, the formula has always been for decades. You take 3 times the median income, and that is the median home price. That's the formula. And it's been that way for decades and decades. Our entire financial structures were built around that ratio. That's why you put 20% down, you get an 80% loan, you go and make that payment, and it's affordable because the median wage is 1/3 the price of the median house. Now, today, it's about 6.5. So we have, in effect,
say that again. It was before
3 to 1.
3 to 1.
Now it's 6.5 to 1.
So you essentially have priced even people earning above that median.
Oh yeah.
Way above it, out of the housing market. Because I don't understand. I pulled up on Zillow, the most affordable housing I could find was $350,000, and then you look at the price of the current interest rate, your mortgage would be $2,800 a month.
Yeah.
I mean, that used to be a mortgage on $1 million home.
That's right.
And so
it's not affordable.
It's not affordable. You just
exactly
kind
right.
of have an impossible task.
It's not impossible, but it's hard.
Unless you can change zoning.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things, there's a few levers that are there to pull. One of them is zoning, for sure. One of them is getting our communities to recognize that the greatest threat to their way of life is not having additional density, but it's not having their kids and grandkids able to live here.
Or be able to have kids.
Yeah, or even be able to have kids. I make a joke, I was at the Utah Bankers Association conference this last 3 days, and these are CEO level, vice president level of our community banks. Very successful individuals. They're educated. Their kids are typically educated. They've checked all of the boxes going up. And I asked them, how many have someone living in their basement or in their home that wish they weren't there? And about half.
Wow.
And so it's hitting at a socioeconomic strata, like you said, $2,800. That's unaffordable for people making $100,000 a year. And so it's hitting higher and higher on that socioeconomic strata and making it harder and harder for everybody. And so because of that, we look at zoning issues, and I think the reaction to zoning is a little bit different now. I think people are willing to say, oh wow, this is now impacting my kids, and this is the group of people that makes the laws. I go to city council meetings, I ask the same questions, typically about half.
Yeah. It seems like if you went to those council meetings where they're trying to say, not in my backyard, you're going to ruin our way. How many of you have kids living in your back basement?
That's right.
Like, how many? Raise your hand.
I want.
It's like you climb that ladder and you're working to just destroy all the rungs after you're climbing.
That's it.
And why? How come people don't recognize that?
It's there's some cognitive dissonance there, right? I mean, you ask people who has kids, who wants their kids to have a place to live. They all raise their hands, and then, okay, who wants additional density? And their hands all go down really quickly. But I think there is some change happening in that space. I laugh and think about the fact that I asked a couple legislators to run a resolution that said you can only complain about additional housing density in a public meeting if you are a Utah native with no children. Because if you've moved here or if you have kids, you are the problem and you can't complain. And, of course, that didn't go very far. But I'd like to do something like that because it is, it's our internal growth that fuels most of this issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how did we get ourselves into this mess? That you need to earn $120,000 to just to be able to afford the lowest homes, cheapest homes on the market.
Well, you've already hit on it. We have a shortage. 37,000 some odd homes.
Well, why were we not building in the last 10 years enough?
If you go back to the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, what had happened prior to that is we had a lot of lenders doing very fishy things, and they were doing a lot of subprime mortgages and things that should not have been done. And as a result, we had the housing bubble that came up after 08, 09, and then the market crashed, right? And we lost a lot of value in the housing market. And prior to that, we had adequate supply. But if you look at how many homes we constructed from about 2009 through about 2016, we dipped down to under 10,000 homes in 1 year, starts in Utah. And our break-even point is 28,000 new units a year, just to break even and keep pace. And so we dipped almost 20,000 units underneath that break-even point. And so we have this, if you look at the chart, it goes like this, we're building. 2008, 2009, we drop way down, and there's this saddle in our production. If you know any builders during that time, they were struggling. We lost a lot of builders. Builders became framers. Framers became, factory workers. I mean, people left the industry because for several years we simply weren't producing the housing because the market got really upside down.
And everybody panicked. And Congress passed this measure allowing institutional investors to come in and buy the single family homes. And that law is still on the books. And so I asked a realtor friend back before COVID, how many of the listings that are coming on the market are being bought by institutional investors? And she said, I couldn't believe the figure. She said about 20%. They'll just come in, bid really high. They know that's a great way to get great yield. And so companies like BlackRock and State Street and these big, massive investment companies own a huge portion of the supply. And why don't we change it to not allow that anymore?
That's one of the initiatives we're working on actually in our interim work. We've got a commission or a committee, Housing Affordability Commission. One of their tasks is to look at corporate ownership and overnight rentals and the impact on the housing market. The latest statistic I have seen, there was a report that Utah was the sixth highest in the amount of new housing that was purchased by corporate ownership. In 2023, it was about 30%.
Wow.
So about 30% of what we produced in 2023 went to large corporate structure ownership. And
I mean, that's literally just making the rich richer and the poor poorer because of a law we've got on the books, and it just seems like that law's got to go.
Yeah, it's being looked at nationally. It's really, really tricky. And I'll give you an example. Is it the same for somebody's grandparents to buy a home and rent it to them? Is that good economic behavior or bad economic behavior? What if they own two homes? Does that become good? It's a really fine line, and everyone is trying to define where that line crosses, but also to do it so that the system can't be gamed. If we go to and we say, well, you can't own any more than 5 homes, let's say, in a single entity, you'll have large corporations that will now have 1,000 entities, each owning 5 homes. And then we turn into the SEC trying to police those ownership structures. So I wish there was an easy answer to that. I mean, I'm talking with colleagues across the country, and they're all struggling with this same dynamic and discussion of how do we appropriately create incentives, or the right set of incentives to ensure that our housing stock goes to owner occupants and not to corporate ownership, which then turns around and does for rent ownership. The county of Salt Lake has commissioned a study. We will see it here, I think, at the end of next month, that will show the total number of corporate ownership units in the county of Salt Lake. So they'll actually have a commission study that will show us exactly what the scope of the problem is, and we'll use that as a guide to really direct our policy going forward.
Well, cool. I guess we'll see if the legislation has teeth. I guess that's what you
That's
say.
what we need.
So we'll take a little break, and when we get back, we'll talk about should we restrict Airbnbs and short-term rentals for different cities that are especially affected by it. And also we're going to talk about tiny homes. Could they be the solution? ADUs, why are they so hard to build? So check out our next section on this program, and we'll take a little break and be right back.